Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel again. In this video we're going to talk about a very particular topic which I can say that as someone who likes economics like I do is very interested, and of course I like to share this with you guys because I feel that this is also very interesting for the folks who also share this same inclination for economics as I do. So, as you probably know through my LinkedIn profile, I studied economics in university, and I closely follow economic developments pretty much worldwide. And so today I want to talk about a news article that came yesterday, yes, on the Financial Times, on the front page actually, that really caught my attention, and that's why I believe that this one is something different, and it's something also insightful for all of us to think about. So, according to the Financial Times, the International Monetary Fund, and this is also a news, by the way, that also the Al Jazeera English channel also broadcasted. They also had an article on this, at least had a news report on this. So the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, which is the acronym that is most well known for them, from them, estimates that the Russian Federation's gross domestic product is expected to increase by 2.6% in 2024, so this year. And this comes on the back of having recorded, at least these what the estimates point out to a 3% growth rate last year in 2023. So, given this claim and this article, and because I'm also talking about this, I need to make some disclaimers here, which I think these are important. So, this video, first and foremost, this video does not mean to express any views regarding the current geopolitical situation that is ongoing between the Russian Federation and the Ukraine. All right. So my views in this video are strictly expressed from an economic perspective, and also upon analyzing the information disclosed in this news article. All right, and and so therefore any comments that are not consistent with the neutral perspective of this video are discouraged in this video. All right, and this is also something that I ask very fondly to all of my viewers and followers. Please abstain for any sort of biased or political comments. We are trying to have a very clean, a very neutral discussion here. So, and also another disclaimer that I need to make is that I'm aware that the statistical data coming out of the relative to the economy of the Russian Federation may be less reliable than it would be for the statistical data of other countries. But I will assume that the IMF is able to collect its data from relatively reliable sources. And one final disclaimer that I need also to make is that although I formerly had a professional, it was a brief one, but a professional relationship with the IMF, the opinions expressed by me in this video are of my sole responsibility, and I do not necessarily reflect the opinions of other people. All right, including the economists that work in the IMF. And so, back to the topic of this video. So, the IMF states in this article that the economic performance of the Russian Federation, again, 2.6% GDP growth rate predicted for 2024, is due primarily to the military spending, which is currently being pursued by the government. And so, in addition to that, last October, this GDP growth rate forecast for 2024 was at 1.1. And so what we see is that there was a 1.5 percentage points increase which is basically the largest upgrade in terms of predicted economic performance among all nations included in the latest World Economic Outlook drafted by the IMF. And so, furthermore, this article also states that these predictions, which are still preliminary, we should say, and they also claim they are preliminary, they are likely also to raise questions about the effectiveness of the significant economic sanctions leveled at the Russian Federation since late February 2022. There are also other details described in the article that I may address as deemed necessary here. But the main topic that I want to assess here, and this is what is the value that I want to bring you guys, is that I want to make an assessment of the impact of those sanctions, which might well be the subject, I believe, of case studies in the coming future when it comes to economic policy from some nations towards other countries. And so, for those who are less aware, the economic sanctions we are talking here include like restrictions on foreign trade, banking operations, asset freezes, not only to individuals but also to entities, companies and enterprises in the Russian Federation. And so these restrictions were expected to have a major impact on the economy of the Russian Federation, which is, of course, as we all know, very dependent on the exports of its natural resources, such as oil and gas. And so, if the sanctions would be effective, the Russian Federation would not be able to continue selling those resources, and so it would be impossible for them to continue funding its military spending, at least at the rate they are currently doing so. And so I believe that there are, I would say, a fewer reasons for these sanctions have apparently failed to achieve their intended economic outcome, or I should say their intended outcome. And so, probably the main reason for me is that economic sanctions are effective only if they are respected by all the other nations which have some sort of economic relationship with the sanctioned country. And so, if some nations breach those sanctions and maintain their usual relationships, especially economic relationships with the sanctioned country, the Russian Federation in this case, those are more likely to become ineffective. And so it is also important to emphasize that if you learn about game theory in economics, you will see that each nation individually on its own in a vacuum has an incentive to breach those sanctions, because if it becomes the only one willing to pursue economic relationships with a sanctioned country, it gets a more significant bargaining power in those relationships. For example, if all countries who had formerly had economic relationships with the Russian Federation abstain from having further relations, but there is one country which continued to do, basically this country will have a much bigger bargaining power in its relations with the Russian Federation, because at the end of the day it's going to be probably the only one who will continue to import the resources which the Russian Federation needs to sell. And so it becomes a sort of a monopsony market structure in which there are many sellers, but there is only one buyer. So the buyer has an increased or a relatively high economic and bargaining power. And so in this particular case, the few current trading partners of the Russian Federation are still able to buy oil and gas at lower prices because of the sanctions being leveled. There are much fewer countries willing to buy the oil and gas from the Russian Federation, and so these current trading partners basically are able to buy at lower prices because the Russian Federation's bargaining power in this process is diminished because of the sanctions. There are less countries willing to buy their oil and gas, and so by buying oil and gas, for example, at lower prices, this also helps the economies of those countries which are breaching these sanctions. And so I would say also another reason for the apparent failure of the sanctions is that, and this is something that is also key even for the future, which is I believe that not all sanctions have the same impact regardless of the nation being targeted by them. So, for example, if you talk about nations about like Cuba or North Korea, which without the sanctions being applied to them are relatively small economies. They are somewhat isolated economies. And also from a geographical perspective, they are relatively isolated. And so these sanctions are much more likely to cripple their economies and leaving them unable to break that stranglehold. And so, as I was saying, the, they have few economic relationships with other partners. So sanctions are much more material and effective, but also because of their geography, they have no direct borders or very few direct borders with other countries, and especially their trading partners. And because of this, these sanctions are likely to become much more effective because it becomes much more difficult to smuggle and bring goods and goods and resources across borders. You see, and so for the Russian Federation, we know, and it's clear to see for everyone that these circumstances do not apply to them because. As we know, it's the largest nation in the world. It shares border with, I believe, there are 14 countries bordering the Russian Federation at the moment, and among them are the countries which are either former Soviet republics, such as, for example, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, also Belarus, for example, and some of those are its major trading partners. I said the example of Belarus, but in this case, for example, China, North Korea, for example, these are major trading partners with the Russian Federation. So, as we can imagine, over the years, these countries have had economic and diplomatic relations, very strong economic and diplomatic relations with the Russian Federation, that makes them much more likely to continue to breach those sanctions, either by maintaining their economic and diplomatic relations as usual, but in this case, economic relations, which is the most important thing, and also by having direct borders with the Russian Federation, goods and resources are able to be smuggled and transported across borders from one country to the other. And so, coming back to the comparison between relatively small and isolated countries and the Russian Federation, another reason for the apparent failure of the sanctions is that the Russian Federation is also one of the largest producers of oil, along with the United States and I believe Saudi Arabia, and also one of the largest producers in the world of gas, which I believe they are at the top together with the United States and also with Iran. And so this makes the oil and gas market being severely deprived of the overall market, I should say, being severely deprived of a large supply source, which would normally cause their prices to increase. But in this case, this creates an even bigger incentive for other countries to breach the sanctions and avoid those very high prices and get access to these resources at cheaper prices, you see. And so also because in this case it was applied, one of the sanctions is that they applied a cap to the prices that the Russian Federation is allowed to sell these resources. So yeah, by establishing a cap, uh, this cap, whether it's respected or not, this also allows other countries which are willing to breach those sanctions and continue to do business with the Russian Federation to buy these resources at much lower price. And so this is also likely to explain why the GDP growth rate of the Russian Federation in 2023 was estimated by the IMF to have been at around 3%, which is a very healthy growth rate for the Russian Federation, which is by far the most sanctioned country in the world, almost four times as much as the next one, which I believe it's Iran. And so now, having said all this, the IMF also states that despite the relatively strong performance, which is no doubt true, and it's a fact for a sanctioned country to have this sort of growth is impressive. But this comes on the back of a very, very significant military spending, which for the economists that are seeing this video, it's public consumption, of course. And so, even though we are seeing this growth, we know and we are aware that the long-term growth potential of the Russian Federation is being severely compromised. And why is that? Because this long-term effect is largely this large curtailment of the growth potential is largely due, in my view, to the amount of Russian Federation citizens that have left the country since February 2022. Some estimates point towards 800,000, 900,000, even a million. A million citizens have left the country. And who are these people? These are people who are in working age, they are educated, they are able to find good jobs and proper work elsewhere. And so for these people, it made sense to leave the country. And so the Russian Federation is being deprived of these human resources, which would be so important to continue to work and to benefit the Russian Federation economy. And because they are no longer there, this puts a dent on its potential in terms of long-term economic potential. And so in light of this scenario, I agree with the IMF's view that with regard to the impact of this monstrous, huge, monstrous, I mean, in terms of the size, huge impact of this brain drain on the long-term economic potential of the Russian Federation, especially as because this migration, this outflow of population is not being replaced by new immigration, because no new citizens or new foreign citizens are coming in to live in the Russian Federation to a significant degree. And also, we have the issue that the total fertility rate of the country, I believe in 2023, they were around 1.5 births per woman. And so this is lower than the 2.1 threshold to achieve the population replacement, complete population replacement over time. And so this is something that over a longer period of time, as things go on, this should become apparent unless something happens that reverses this trend. And so it's important to see that, all right, this economic performance that is currently ongoing is significant, and it's quite impressive, but it's being induced by a type of, I should say, public consumption, which is military spending, which is not necessarily productive or reproductive in terms of economic well-being. And for the long run, whatever happens to the situation that is ongoing in terms of between Ukraine and Russian Federation, we would have to see whether this trend in terms of curtailment of the economic potential on the long term continues to evolve in the same trend, in the same way, or if there is something that will reverse this trend at some point along the way. And so this is an interesting topic, even from an economic perspective, to understand that, all right, the government has in fact some leeway to induce this kind of performance, but there's something happening behind the scenes which is severing and curtailing the economic potential of a country. And so this is something that we will need to continue to monitor over time, as we all economists do, of course. And this is something that we love. And I believe that this specific topic of the economic sanctions is very interesting because, uh, as economics in itself is not, you can always you can expect some outcomes from a specific measure or policy, and in fact it can happen that the opposite happens. And so this is something very interesting, and so I believe that we will continue to monitor this for the foreseeable future. So, but at the moment, this is all that I want to talk about in this video. So feel free to leave your comments down below, like also the video, and subscribe to the channel. And as always, I will also be available on LinkedIn if you have any further questions. So thank you so much for coming up here. Thank you, guys. And of course, have all the best for you. Thank you.